Hey guys, what's going on? First one I got for you today is a collection of stories by Washington Irving, signed by Washington Irving himself, I just discovered. How about that? When I read these stories, it was seasonal because his big two short stories, Rip Van Winkle and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, are set in fall. It is, however, snowing outside my window right now, so we are certainly past the peak of fall. But the perfect book to read outside on a blustery fall day. Washington Irving was the first American professional writer, and he was also the first American writer to be popular in England, which I'm sure was a strained relationship, and for him to bridge that gap must have been pretty big. I'm trying to get back into writing, and I'm taking Hemingway's advice and throwing out my first novel, trying to forget about it, and currently writing the second one. So I'm going to try and look at the structure of these stories a little bit more. As far as Washington Irving goes, he was a short story guy, which is not the medium I'm working with. But one thing I noticed is that he always leaves room for interpretation with the ending. You can choose what you want to have happen. Do you want the supernatural element involved, or do you want to believe the rational conclusion? I like that aspect about it, where it's not, here's what happens at the end, but it's like, what do you think happens at the end? But mostly in this book, there was a lot of nonfiction pieces, just kind of slice of life stories about rural America, which I got really into. He clearly cares about the natural world. He clearly feels at peace on a farm, which I can relate to. And he also had a very sympathetic opinion about Native Americans, which was probably unpopular at the time. But of course, as time has gone on, and we have the benefit of hindsight, Washington Irving had the modern perspective on the whole thing. Seemed like a good guy. I would have liked to know him. Next up, we got The Book of Skulls by Robert Silverberg, the second Silverberg I've read other than The World Inside, and it pulled me out of a bit of a reading slump, which I imagine Silverberg is good at. He always tells a really compelling tale, and of course his past as an erotic writer definitely helps to spur you on just a little bit. But the book is about four college-age boys, 20, 21, 22. One of them learns about an immortality ritual in Arizona, so on spring break they take a road trip down there and party all the way. Each chapter is written from one of the boys' perspectives, so it constantly shifts back and forth. One of them is an ambitious, brooding farm boy. One of them is rich and entitled. One of them is nerdy and Jewish and going through a constant existential crisis. And one of them is poetic and romantic and gay. Of course, these four identities don't exactly congeal with one another, and in each character's POV, they're very critical of one another. And if this book were to have been published today, not that it ever would be published today, it would have a massive trigger warning on the front cover. And it got me thinking about what being triggered means, because obviously there's this huge negative connotation behind it. But you can be triggered in a negative way and you can be triggered in a positive way. But actually the climax of this book is one of the characters getting triggered, essentially. And unfortunately, he has the absolute worst case scenario of somebody being triggered. And I think why the term has such a negative connotation, because it has such potentially powerful consequences, both good and bad. But I think the reluctance to trigger someone comes from people not wanting to take the risk of the worst case scenario to try and achieve the best case scenario. The book is beautifully written. It is extremely readable. It is a compelling narrative. It goes to some dark places. It will probably trigger you, but I think in a good way. I was triggered, and it makes you turn to self-realization, and it makes you look inward and wonder why it evoked that response. And I think if you can achieve that rational response as opposed to an emotional response, then reading books like this will help you figure yourself out and why you are certain ways. And like I was talking about in Fifth Business by Robertson Davies, okay, sure, after you're like 25 years old, there's not much changing you can do to your core, but you can have a deeper understanding of that core so that you can filter it and shore up places where you know you are lacking and you know need improvement. Anyways, last book we got here is The Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. A new book, which is pretty rare for this channel. I think this was written in 2022. I did read Station 11, and I liked Station 11. And I'm glad I had the experience of reading that, because this is the same kind of novel. I've described it before as a novel of theme. I don't know if that rings true for a lot of people, but it's not plot driven. There is more of a narrative in this book than there was Station 11, but it's more about how it feels. Kind of like Bradbury, as I described him before. It's hard to describe because it's not plot driven, but it jumps around between all these different timelines that are linked by some weird anomaly. There's this interference happening in all these different time frames, and eventually it becomes a time travel story and they're trying to figure out why. But a lot of the time frames involve a pandemic. COVID is actually in the story. I heard about COVID novels before, but I thought that was just a term for novels written during COVID that would have themes of loneliness and fear. But this actually has COVID in the book. And it has a character that I can only imagine is autobiographical of Emily St. John Mandel, because it's an author going on a book tour after she wrote a successful book about a pandemic, which was Station 11, exactly, right? Which I thought was really cool. And my favorite part of this book was when that character is doing a Q&A at some lecture event, and an audience member stands up and asks her, "What was the deal with the ending of your book? It just kind of ends." And that was exactly my thought about Station 11, and I could picture myself in the audience asking that question. Well, I wouldn't ask that question, but I can picture myself in that audience nodding, like, yeah, please come and tell me the answer to that. And of course, she doesn't give an answer. She just kind of hints, why would somebody ask me that? So that was fairly early on in the book, and I thought that was an indicator that this book is going to be different, that this book is actually going to have an ending that ends. But that's not really the case. I think maybe it didn't hit me very hard because anybody who's read a good deal of vintage sci-fi will have encountered this ending before in a very, very popular short story. But it was still intriguing. And also, the author photo has never been important for me in any book I've read. But this one, since she is a character in the book, was relevant. And somehow I can imagine what she's like. I am just assuming all of these traits based on physical appearance, which is like a cardinal sin these days, I know. But I don't know, something about her speaks to a personality. And also, I don't know if I'm just reading into this, but this woman could be my sister or me or something. Or maybe it's just that we have the same hair. Yeah, kind of weird. But all that being said, that it didn't really have a strong narrative, and I do struggle with books like that. It was beautifully written. I was engrossed. For the first half of this book, I had it as a 10 out of 10. I was so invested in it. I love her writing style, and I loved a lot of the snippets that she was giving you. There was never really a firm thematic commitment, I feel, but she jumped around to all these different spots that I was wanting for her to go into a little bit more. She never really did, unfortunately, but that is kind of her style. And I'm hesitant to compare her to Le Guin, but the writing is similarly beautiful and poignant and elegant. But of course, Le Guin did the same thing while having a very strong narrative, so, you know, can't quite compare exactly, but I love this book. And I think with this being the second novel of hers, I prepared myself for a lackluster ending, so it didn't have the same steep drop-off that Station 11 did, but just kind of a minor decline. Which is really exciting because, you know, modern sci-fi, for me, has just been a lot of misses, so it's great to actually read a recent book and like it, and be part of, you know, some kind of modern conversation. That's fun. And that's what I got for you guys today. I don't think I'm on track to complete my reading challenge for the year, but I'm going to see what I can do. Maybe reach 50 books, I don't know. In any case, thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.